In the summer of 1565, the blue waters of the Mediterranean trembled under the thunder of war drums. From the east came a storm, vast and relentless. The Ottoman Empire, a force that had conquered continents, crushed kingdoms, and humbled empires. 40,000 soldiers sailed under the banner of the Crescent, their goal clear and uncompromising: to erase a tiny island fortress called Malta from the map of Christendom. On that island waited no army of equal might, only 500 knights of the Order of St. John, a few thousand Maltese militia, and a handful of mercenaries and civilians. Yet these men, surrounded by sea and certain death, would defy the greatest empire on earth for 4 agonizing months. This is the story of the siege that defied logic, the stand that echoed across history, the Great Siege of Malta. For decades, the Ottoman Empire had dominated the Mediterranean world. Under Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, their fleets had conquered Rhodes, humbled Venice, and reached the very gates of Vienna. The Christian nations of Europe trembled at their advance, divided by politics, religion, and pride. Yet one order, the Knights Hospitaller, driven from their homeland of Rhodes decades earlier, refused to vanish. Granted the barren island of Malta by Emperor Charles V, the Knights turned it into a fortress of faith. They were warriors, monks, and sailors, men who had sworn vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, yet wielded swords as instruments of God's will. To the Ottomans, the Knights were nothing more than pirates, raiding Muslim ships, disrupting Ottoman trade, and symbolizing Christian defiance. To Suleiman, their presence on Malta was an insult to imperial authority. The Sultan resolved to crush them once and for all. As Ottoman fleets gathered in Constantinople, spies raced across the seas with word of invasion. Grand Master Jean Parisot de Valette, a veteran of battles past and now in his 70s, received the warnings with grim resolve. He was no ordinary commander. Scarred by war, tempered by years of leadership, de Valette knew the enemy's strength and his own weakness. He had at most 6,000 men, including soldiers, volunteers, and civilians. The enemy numbered nearly 40,000, with thousands of elite janissaries, cavalry, engineers, and artillery. But de Valette also understood the terrain. Malta was a fortress carved from stone, and he would make every wall, every bastion, every grain of dust fight for survival. He sent desperate appeals for aid to Spain, Sicily, and the Pope, but no help could arrive in time. Malta would stand or fall alone. In May 1565, dark sails appeared on the horizon. Ottoman ships filled the sea like a moving city, galleys, transports, and warships bristling with guns. When they anchored, their banners turned the shoreline into a tapestry of red and green. The invasion began. Ottoman troops disembarked, building camps, raising tents, and planting cannons aimed toward the fortresses of the Knights. The defenders watched from their walls as thousands of men poured onto their island, a living tide of steel and ambition. For the first few days, the air was thick with anticipation, both sides preparing for the clash that would decide Malta's fate. The Ottomans' first objective was Fort St. Elmo, a small but vital fortress guarding the entrance to the Grand Harbour. Its position made it the key to Malta's defence. Whoever held St. Elmo controlled the harbour and could strike at the heart of the island. The Ottomans believed it would fall within days. They brought forward heavy cannon, dug trenches, and began an unrelenting bombardment. For days and nights, thunder rolled as cannonballs smashed into the walls, shaking the earth and filling the air with dust and fire. Yet the defenders held. The knights, dressed in their black robes marked by white crosses, fought like men possessed. When breaches opened, they filled them with rubble and bodies. When the walls cracked, they built new ones behind the ruins. Wounded men refused to retreat, crawling back to the battlements to fight. They fired muskets until barrels overheated, then threw stones and boiling oil at attackers scaling the walls. The Ottomans attacked in waves, Janissaries with shields and scimitars, engineers carrying ladders, sappers digging beneath the earth to plant explosives. But each wave broke upon the rocks of Maltese resistance. Weeks passed, and the siege of St. Elmo turned into a nightmare. The sun baked the land, the air stank of blood and powder, and bodies piled in the trenches. Ottoman commanders, shocked by the defenders' stubbornness, sent message after message to their leaders, demanding reinforcements. The fortress that was supposed to fall in a few days still stood after 3 weeks. Every assault came at a terrible cost. By June, the Ottoman camp was littered with corpses, and morale began to waver. Still, they pressed on. Finally, after 28 days of hell, the last defenders of St. Elmo were overwhelmed. When the fort fell, only a handful of knights remained alive. The Ottomans, enraged by the resistance, mutilated the bodies and floated the corpses across the harbor as a warning to the remaining defenders. But de Valette did not flinch. He ordered that captured Ottoman heads be fired back by cannon in reply. It was no longer a war of nations. It was a war of endurance, faith, and vengeance. The fall of St. Elmo gave the Ottomans control of the harbor, but the price was devastating. Thousands of their best soldiers lay dead, and the defenders, though bloodied, were unbroken. Now the battle turned toward the main fortresses, Birgu and Senglea, where de Valette commanded his remaining forces. The Ottomans unleashed their artillery once more. Day after day, cannon fire rained upon the walls. Houses crumbled, streets vanished beneath rubble, and yet the defenders fought on. Inside the fortress, food ran low, water grew scarce, and disease spread among the wounded. The Maltese civilians, trapped within the walls, shared their rations and carried stones to repair breaches. De Valette walked the ramparts daily, calm amid chaos, his presence reminding every man that surrender was not an option. "We are few," he told them, "but we fight for all of Christendom." The Ottomans tried everything. They launched amphibious assaults using boats to attack from the sea, but the defenders had prepared hidden gun emplacements. As the Ottoman craft approached, the cannons roared, shattering hulls and drowning men by the hundreds. They sent sappers to tunnel under the walls, but the defenders dug countermines and met them underground, fighting with swords and torches in the dark. They tried to lure the defenders into open battle, but de Valette refused, forcing them to bleed against stone. The siege dragged into July, then August. Heat, hunger, and exhaustion began to take their toll on both sides. The Ottomans' supply lines stretched thin. Disease ravaged their camps. Janissaries mutinied, refusing to attack suicidal positions again. Even the commanders began to quarrel. Still, the Ottomans pressed on. They launched a massive assault on the peninsula of Senglea, where Fort St. Michael stood. Thousands of soldiers charged, crossing floating bridges under covering fire. The defenders responded with deadly precision. Cannons hidden behind bastions opened fire at point-blank range, turning the bridges into splinters and the attackers into corpses. Those who reached the walls were met with burning pitch, crossbow bolts, and pikes. For hours, the battle raged until the sea itself turned red. When the smoke cleared, the Ottomans had gained nothing but death. Inside the fortress, despair lurked but never triumphed. De Valette moved among his men, wounded but unyielding. He prayed with them, bled with them, and fought beside them. Every man, knight or peasant, became a warrior. Women carried stones and water, children loaded muskets, and priests offered last rites between cannon volleys. Malta was no longer just a battlefield. It was a crucible of human will. By late August, after nearly 4 months of siege, the Ottomans were reaching their limit. Casualties soared above 25,000. Ammunition was running out. Disease had weakened their ranks. Then came rumors. Spanish reinforcements were on their way from Sicily. Panic began to ripple through the Ottoman camp. Some commanders urged withdrawal, fearing they would be trapped. But Mustafa Pasha, the Ottoman general, refused to retreat without victory. He ordered one final assault, a storm meant to crush the last resistance before help could arrive. The attack came at dawn. The sky was black with smoke, the air thick with the roar of drums and cannon. Thousands of Ottomans surged forward in one last attempt to overwhelm Birgu and St. Michael. They climbed over piles of their own dead, firing muskets, swinging swords, shouting battle cries. The defenders, reduced to a fraction of their former strength, met them at the breach. The fighting was savage, hand to hand, face to face, until the stones themselves ran slick with blood. Yet still the walls held. Then, on September 7th, the horizon shimmered with sails. Spanish reinforcements had arrived. The relief army, 8,000 strong, landed on the northern coast and began advancing toward the Ottoman lines. The Ottomans, exhausted and demoralized, turned to face this new threat. Mustafa Pasha tried to rally his troops, but the will to fight was gone. When the Spanish forces struck, chaos erupted. The Ottoman army broke. Soldiers fled toward their ships, abandoning tents, cannons, and supplies. The defenders poured from their fortresses, joining the counterattack. By evening, the great Ottoman host that had once threatened to conquer Malta was in full retreat. On September 8, 1565, after 4 months of unrelenting battle, the siege was over. The aftermath was grim but glorious. Of the 500 knights who had stood at the beginning, fewer than half survived. Thousands of Maltese civilians were dead, their towns reduced to ruins. Yet the island still flew the banner of the cross. The Ottomans had lost more than 25,000 men, their prestige shattered, their aura of invincibility broken. Across Europe, church bells rang. Letters spread news of the victory like wildfire. The great siege of Malta became a symbol of resistance, of courage against impossible odds. For Grand Master Jean de Valette, it was both triumph and tragedy. He had defended Christendom, but at terrible cost. In the years that followed, he began rebuilding the island, founding a new capital, Valletta, a city of stone and fortifications carved in honor of those who fell. Malta became a symbol of strength, the bastion that stopped the Ottoman tide. And though Suleiman the Magnificent would die the next year, his empire never again threatened Europe with the same fearsome momentum. The Great Siege of Malta was not merely a military victory, it was a testament to endurance. It proved that numbers alone could not conquer conviction, that faith and leadership could defy even the mightiest empires. History would remember how a handful of knights, armed with courage and unity, turned a tiny island into a fortress of hope. Their stand inspired generations, echoing in the centuries that followed. And even now, when we look back on those 4 months of terror and triumph, we see a truth as timeless as war itself, that the strongest walls are not made of stone, but of the unyielding spirit of those who refuse to fall.